Sister Loch, after November 1996, you started or commenced developing a professional standards steering committee, is that correct? And that was in your role as congregational leader initially? And that committee was formulated to establish appropriate processes to respond to allegations of child sexual abuse or any sexual abuse within the...
Any abuse.
Any abuse within the congregation. So sexual or physical, child or adult.
Yes. I don't remember any complaints of adult, but that's where it would have gone.
And the purpose of it was also to look at the prevention of such abuse within the congregation. Now, in doing that, you had regard to the Towards Healing protocols. And had you been aware of those protocols before the end of 1996?
Yes, they had been under development then for several years, and so it was in that context that I had come to any knowledge I did have about abuse.
And so after you became leader of your congregation in 1991, it was in the years that followed that the Towards Healing protocols were being discussed and formulated, wasn't it? And you were made aware of those protocols during that time?
Yes.
And the ethos behind that?
Yes.
And there would have been discussion between you and other leaders of different congregations within the Catholic faith about those protocols? And would you have been aware of them as early as 1993?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. I just don't know.
Sister Rowan became leader of the congregation in September 1996, is that correct?
She was elected in September 96. The changeover date was the 12th of December that year.
So between September and December 1996, you remained as leader, but she was leader-elect, for want of a better phrase. Mm-hmm. And after December 1996, you had a position as the Congregational Professional Standards Officer as part of the Professional Standards Committee. And you held that position from January until July 1997. As part of the Professional Standards Committee and as an officer on that committee, part of your responsibilities was to formulate a draft handbook for the dealing of complaints of child sexual abuse.
Yes.
And that was published in the draft of the handbook was published in March 1997. Is that correct?
I'm not certain of the dates, but it's probably right.
So perhaps if we can bring up the document behind tab 105. This is a document drafted, a minute drafted the 20th, or at least dated the 22nd of April 1997. And attached to this minute are the draft guidelines for response. And then if we turn to the guidelines for response dated April 1997,
bottom of the document.
Can I just ask you this, looking at these guidelines, are these the guidelines that were formulated as part of the working party under the Professional Standards Committee? You can just scroll down if you like.
I'm sorry, I've forgotten exactly what the question was.
Are they the guidelines, the draft guidelines that were produced by the Professional Standards Steering Committee in which you were involved?
Yes, yes.
And indeed, they were formulated by a working party which you were part of, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And they're the draft guidelines that were produced which set out how to respond to allegations of abuse.
Yes.
And did you support these guidelines?
Yes.
And you were part of formulating those guidelines? And what advice did you obtain in producing these guidelines?
We were working according to the principles of Towards Healing, which by then was, if not fully published, it was in its penultimate sort of phase. And we were using the advice of Dr. Robert Grant.
And how did these draft guidelines sit alongside the Towards Healing protocols?
At this stage, Towards Healing was not implemented to the point where you could refer something to it. So the two more or less went side by side, but there came a point, it's after my time, but there came a point at which it was possible to rely on the Towards Healing processes instead.
And did the Towards Healing protocols and processes, did they overtake these guidelines in that these guidelines were subsumed within it?
Yes.
So once the Towards Healing protocols were implemented, are they the protocols that the Sisters of Mercy would follow should they receive a complaint of sexual abuse?
Yes. To the extent that if people wanted to bring a complaint, that's where we'd put the complaint. However, there has continued since this time to be an immediate response from the congregation to anyone who comes forward, which doesn't. It goes to Towards Healing if the person wants to go to Towards Healing, but it doesn't always.
So there are a separate set of guidelines which sit alongside Towards Healing, is that correct?
We would regard Towards Healing as being the primary response of the whole church. The congregation had its way of responding to people as well.
And how you respond as a congregation, the Sisters of Mercy, is the process encapsulated in these draft guidelines?
I would have developed but the same direction. Yes, I wouldn't like to say that that's exactly how things are applied today because it would have changed.
So, just so I'm clear, is there a separate set of guidelines in existence for the Sisters of Mercy or the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy? Is there a separate set of guidelines in existence for them to respond to allegations of sexual abuse?
Yes.
And are they published?
Yes. not published, not sort of out there in the public field, but approved by the leadership team, yes.
And how do those guidelines sit with towards healing? What's
Quite consistent in approach.
But if a person comes forward with an allegation of child sexual abuse, how would a person at the Sisters of Mercy respond?
Well, the first thing would be to say, if it's a criminal matter, that's got to go to the police.
Right.
I think years ago that used to be a choice offered to people with towards healing, but I don't think we could ever make that a choice these days. So that would be the first thing, and then it would be about, do they want to go to towards healing? What do they want to do with it, sort of thing, you know.
So they're offered the towards healing protocols? They're made aware of those protocols?
Yes.
And if they say no, do you then progress through your own protocols?
Yes, so leaving aside the criminality that I've already referred to.
And do you have a copy of those protocols?
Not right in front of me at the moment.
But you can obtain those
Yes.
and provide them to the Royal Commission?
Oh, we did, yes.
You have?
I think we did.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
All right, we can chase that up. Now, as part of the Professional Standards Committee, you were in that role until July 1997?
Yes.
And the Professional Standards Steering Committee became known as the Professional Standards Committee, and that established a Professional Standards Office, is that correct? And that was after your time, really, wasn't it?
It was during my time as the response coordinator, but not in my time as leader.
But it was towards the end of your time on the committee that the Professional Standards Office was established.
I think that's right, yes.
Can I ask you this? How did the Professional Standards Committee and Professional Standards Office, how did those entities or those committees or organisational bodies fit with the equivalent in the diocese, so the Special Resource Group? How would those two organisations interact?
They were two different organisations because we were dealing with different areas of responsibility, but I think there was a common member right from the beginning. There was certainly some contact.
Because it was quite feasible, as was the case for many former residents, where they suffered, or they alleged they suffered, physical abuse by the sisters,
Yes.
and also sexual abuse by a priest.
Yes.
So their allegations spanned both, or related to both parts of the church. How would the Professional Standards Committee deal with a situation like that?
I think you'd have to say that every situation had its own sort of parameters, depending on whether we were talking about people who are alive, people who are already deceased. We went ahead with dealing with what we could deal with, as long as we weren't stepping on the toes of, say, a police investigation or something like that.
Would you refer a matter to the Diocese Special Resource Group?
Yes, if it had anything to do with a priest, yes.
So you wouldn't deal with it, you might deal with your aspect of it and then refer it on to the diocese in respect of a priest.
Yes.
So in that way, was there a doubling up or a duplicate of resources used?
Well, I don't think I'd see it as a doubling up. Or put it this way, I don't know how it would have been possible to do it differently. That doesn't mean it isn't possible, just that I don't know how.
From your recollection, Was consideration given to maybe combining the two, or was it
Yes,
considered?
there was at least one discussion of that.
And can you recall the reasons why it wasn't combined, why it was kept separate?
I think it was a decision of the diocese that they thought, and I do understand that, because they were dealing with a broader scope of things than just our ministries.
Did that add to the strain on your resources?
I was never aware of that.
It wouldn't have been more efficient to perhaps have one response from both organisations?
I really can't answer that.
In any event, there was correspondence and communication between the diocese and the Sisters of Mercy in respect of the complaints or allegations raised by former residents. I want to ask you now about, in particular, your dealings with Mr. David Owen after the Professional Standards Committee was established.
Councillor Assisting, just before you move off that topic, I just want to check something with you, please, Sister. The process involved towards healing has a number of steps, as you know.
Yes, it does.
Which includes the allegation that's made and an assessment of that allegation, and quite often that might mean involvement of psychiatric assessment and other things. If a person came forward at that time with a statement or a claim or an allegation of physical abuse with respect to the nuns and sexual abuse with respect to a priest, would that victim have to go through the formal assessment of each professional standards organisation?
At that stage, we're prior to professional standards, so we couldn't refer it to the State Professional Standards Office. All we could do was deal with it ourselves. I don't remember an instance. I do remember one where we recommended an investigation, and that was after my time. I don't remember ever sending or expecting anybody to undertake psychiatric assessment, but I can't definitively say that didn't happen. We were struggling to put in place what we anticipated would happen.
So you can't recall whether a victim of abuse or a survivor of abuse experienced a joint or separate process?
You mean one by the diocese and one by... Oh, I don't think so, no.
And just a second query from me. With respect to allegations made against the nuns and against a priest by a particular person, was there a formal written advice between the two organisations, the diocese and the Sisters of Mercy, or was it informal and oral?
I think it was informal and oral.
So it might by chance mean that sometimes the communication might be less than adequate?
I don't think it was likely to happen because of the joint kind of membership. The person who was our sort of social worker working for us was also, I think, at all times on the diocesan committee. So I don't think there was that type of breakdown.
Did that person have, as part of their formal responsibilities, the responsibility of communicating valid and relevant information from one organisation to another?
There was a formal point at which we said that that person was authorised to take communication unless it was should be kept confidential, say to the complainant or something like that.
And that formal request from the committee would be minuted?
Yes, it would have been, I think, at all times.
Thank you.
After the Professional Standards Committee was formed, of which you were a part, did you consider Mr. Owen's position again.
Yes, we did.
And you say at paragraph 89 of your statement, and I'll just bring this up.
Please, thank you.
You say that at the first meeting of the Professional Standards Committee, Mr. Owen's case was discussed. He had contacted Sister Slattery and requested to take up my offer to speak with him.
Yes.
And that offer had been made earlier in late 1995.
I don't remember the date, but it certainly was quite a while previous, yes.
So in September 1995, that offer had been made, and it was in 1997 that you took up, or he took up that offer.
Yes.
And you did meet with him, didn't you?
I did.
And you also say in your statement, at paragraph 90, that you believed his position deserved serious consideration by the Professional Standards Committee.
I did.
And in fact, you raised his position with the Standards Committee.
Yes.
And at a later time, an ex gratia amount was paid to Mr. Owen. Had your views on Mr. Owen's allegations changed between 1995, when you agreed with the decision to defend an application to extend the statute of limitations to allow for his and AYQ's claim? Had your position changed in respect of Mr. Owen from 1995 until 1997?
I don't remember that we ever used this or tried to use the statute of limitations against Mr. Owen, did we?
Well, it was raised, AYQ's claim went before the courts first.
Yes.
Mr. Owen's claim was lodged but not argued, and on the basis of the decision on AYQ's claim, Mr. Owen's claim did not proceed. So your position in respect of both AYQ and David Owen was to defend the claims on the basis that you would position in respect of both AYQ and David Owen was to
see that a legal claim could go anywhere.
Had your position changed between 1995 and 1997 in respect of David Owen?
To the extent that when yes, I had developed a belief that it was far more likely than I had originally thought that this could be a valid case.
And Father Anderson was dead in the mid-1980s, from the mid-1980s. So he was dead before 1995. So why had your position changed in respect of your belief in the veracity of the claims? Why had that changed between 1995 and 1997? What had caused that to change?
A key factor was that the bishop at one stage told me that this is somewhere in 96, I could not track down the date, but somewhere the bishop told me that he believed the allegations against Father Reg Durham were actually upheld, should be upheld. And
so if we just
that
pause
made a
there,
big change to me.
We'll just pause there. If I take you to that paragraph, at paragraph 60, so you say there, not long after AYQ's proceedings had concluded, So that would be late 1990 or early 1996.
Yes.
Bishop Heenan had informed me that he thought the allegations against Reg Durham might be true.
Yes, I couldn't track down the exact dates.
No, but perhaps if I read that again, I've left out it. At some stage, not long after AYQ's proceedings had concluded, so you were informed of that on the 18th of January 96. I went to a meeting with Mr Shaw and Bishop Heenan at Lawyers. Either immediately or shortly before this meeting, Bishop Heenan had informed me that he thought that allegations against Reg Durham might be true. So it's this conversation with Bishop Heenan in early 1996 that you've just given evidence has informed your approach towards Mr Owen, is that correct?
Yes, towards the whole question of sexual abuse, really.
Mr Owen made allegations against Father Anderson, not Father Durham.
That's right.
You knew that. So what was it about this conversation which changed your approach to Mr Owen?
Yes, Father Reg Durham and Father Anderson were both very high-profile people in the whole Catholic community and certainly in the whole story of Neerkol. If an allegation against one of them might be true, then indeed I had to believe that the other might be as well.
And what information you had received on that was simply Bishop Heenan's view on that, is that correct?
Yes.
Did he tell you on what basis Bishop Heenan had come to that view?
No, he didn't share any specific details with me. He just shared that he believed it was true.
So the opinion of Bishop Heenan was of such significance to you that it could change your view, is that correct?
Yes. On this matter?
On this matter. And why did you attach such significance to Bishop Heenan's opinion on this matter?
He knew the priests in a way in which I'd never know them. And he also would not be likely to accept such an opinion lightly. So therefore I was very strongly influenced by it.
At this stage, in early 1996, this is before the ministerial statement, isn't it, of September 1996?
Yes.
So, when you described earlier the allegations as sensational against sensational allegations against former priests and nuns, you had, as of January 1996, some reason to believe at least allegations were true against Father Durham, didn't you?
Yes.
So, when that ministerial statement was released, did you believe that at least some of the allegations that had been made may well be true?
May well be. I of course, did not know what allegations Mr Lingard was referring to.
So, this conversation with Bishop Heenan, you say was instrumental or of significance in your approach a year later in your actions on the Professional Steering Committee.
Yeah. Well, the two things weren't directly linked. This was about the allegation against Father Reg Durham. We had done quite a lot of other work in developing our whole understanding of both physical and sexual abuse. So there was another thing happening as well. This is not the only factor.
But when I asked you what had changed in respect of Mr Owen and your approach to Mr Owen, you nominated this conversation as one of the features that had changed your approach.
Yeah.
you went on to recommend that Mr Owen be compensated or receive an ex gratia payment from the church and from the Sisters of Mercy.
I wasn't actually recommending that. That's further down the track, but I certainly wasn't against it.
And was that because you believed the allegations raised by Mr Owen?
I think I just told you something in error, but I think that ex gratia payment is it's further down. I think I am congregation leader again at that time. Look, I'd have to check the dates. I'm sorry, I just can't quite recall.
In any event, your approach to Mr Owen's allegations changed between 1995 and 1997.
Yes.
You met with him.
Yes, and that was very instrumental.
And you listened to his allegations.
Yes.
And once you had listened to those allegations and met with him, as you said, that was instrumental, wasn't it?
Yes.
It gave a different context and a different feeling to those allegations.
Yes.
Listening to them from a person.
Yes.
And do you agree that's part and parcel why it's important to contact the person making the allegations early in the piece?
That's why we have written them into our processes, yes.
And that is something that can give you a true gauge as to the veracity or otherwise of the allegations. It's one of the features of that.
Yes.
But more importantly, it's also about acknowledging those allegations to a person.
Yes.
As a member of the Professional Standards Steering Committee, you held that as a member of the Professional Standards Steering Committee, you no longer were involved, at least in a formal way, with the Professional Standards Committee or the Professional Standards Office. And you returned as congregational leader in 2006. And the Professional Standards Office continues to operate to this day and continues to respond to allegations of abuse at Neerkol.
Yes.
Or support for persons who have suffered at Neerkol.
Yes, it's been a constant factor ever since it was established.
Is it confined to people? Sorry, I withdraw that. Are the services that are provided by the Professional Support Office, are they confined to former residents of Neerkol?
Not necessarily, but that's where its focus is.
Now, I just want to ask you a few questions about the protocol. I think we have a copy. Can I just provide you with a copy of this?
The current protocol?
It is. And I'll... Perhaps if I tender it now, Your Honour, so that we can all have a copy.
26.26.
Sister Loch, were you involved in formulating this policy?
The policy itself, which underpins it, yes, I was. And some aspects of this as well.
Because this was introduced in 2011 when you were leader of the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy.
No. What you have here is the document of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea. It's the new body.
Yes.
But in preparation for what we call reconfiguring, for this coming about, in preparation for that, I was one of some who put together the policy because we wanted the new institute to start with a policy in place.
Right. So when this was introduced, you were leader of the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea.
When we accepted it, yes.
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 And you were leader of the previous congregation, which formed part and parcel of this congregation,
Yes.
namely the Sisters of Mercy, which developed the policy upon which this is based.
That's right.
And you were part of the group that drafted this policy. Now, did you have regard to Towards Healing?
Yes, Towards Healing we've got a full commitment to Towards Healing. The Rockhampton congregation did, and Ismar PNG does now.
And so the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy implement both Towards Healing and this policy.
Yes, yes.
Now, if you have an issue about Towards Healing, who do you speak to within the Catholic Church? Who's the person you go to?
It will depend on the state, and our professional standards officer for the whole of Ismar PNG does keep up a relationship with each of the state Towards Healing groups. There is a national one as well, and we do relate to them, yes.
Because your understanding of the Towards Healing protocol commenced shortly after. Your understanding of the Towards Healing, that's correct, isn't it? You were aware of the...
It was developing. It wasn't actually implemented till...
No, I understand that,
yes.
but you were aware that these protocols were being developed and would
Yes.
come into place.
Yes.
And in that,
Yes.
but you were aware that these protocols were being developed and would
Yes.
come into place. And information in respect of child sexual abuse, in particular, that formed the basis of Towards Healing. Is that right?
Yes.
And you were aware of that throughout the early 90s, is that correct?
Not very well, no. We only met, ACLRI only met once a year, an annual conference, and usually at that conference there was an update on what was happening with the development of Towards Healing, or it wasn't always known by that name, but whatever was happening in that area.
And when the allegations were raised with you for the first time, when allegations involving sexual or physical abuse at Neerkol were first in 1993, through allegations involving sexual or physical abuse at Neerkol were first during that time period, you would agree that you were aware of the ethos and policies which would underpin the Towards Healing protocols. And in particular, you were aware that the issue of how the Catholic diocese was going to respond to, and in particular, you were aware that the issue of how the Catholic Church, yes?
Yes.
It was discussed at Bishop's Conference.
It was discussed at least once a year among ourselves, yes. And then, of course, there'd be other discussions in between time, but the big steps were really those annual ones.
And when you were confronted with the allegations between 1993 and 1996, did you contact or have any contact with the persons within the Catholic diocese who were responsible for implementing the Towards Healing protocols?
Nobody was implementing until at least towards the end of 96, as far as I know.
Yes, my mistake. Who were developing the Towards Healing protocols?
No, I didn't.
Because wasn't Father Brian Lucas a person who was involved in developing those protocols?
He could have been. I think he probably was.
You understand that Father Brian Lucas is the General Secretary of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference?
Yes.
And it was the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference that published the protocol?
With the ACLRI, yes.
And wasn't Father Brian Lucas the person that you consulted about the press releases?
Yes.
And during the time that you were consulting Father Lucas about the press releases, did you consult him about the Towards Healing protocols or the development of such protocols?
I don't remember doing so.
Do you think that would have been a good opportunity to do so?
Yes, I do.
And that you could have sought his advice on how to respond compassionately and appropriately to these allegations of child sexual abuse?
Yes, but the process part of it was not very well developed at that stage. Their principles were.
Well, but it had been discussed at bishops' conferences since the late 1980s, hadn't it? You accept that? We don't
Late
know.
1980s, I'm not too sure. Well, yes, probably, because by 91 certainly something was happening.
So did you ever receive any advice from Father Lucas when you were talking about press releases about what a compassionate and appropriate response to the allegations would be?
No, I did not.
Or how the emerging Towards Healing protocols might address such issues?
No, I did not.
And was that because your focus at the time, between 1993 and late 1996, was on preserving the reputation of the Catholic Church? That was your primary focus?
No, it was not.
And that's the reason why the focus was on the press. Well, I withdraw that. That was why your response did not involve directly contacting any of the persons whom had made the allegations.
Nobody ever told me not to contact anyone. It went the other way around. I did not have sufficient insight to go and contact them.
And you didn't take the opportunity to acquire that insight by
Gradually we did, but we took a long time.
And while you were contacting Father Lucas about press releases, you didn't ask him for any expertise about how to compassionately respond to the allegations of sexual
No, I did not.
abuse. You are the current leader of the Institute of Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea.
Indeed I am.
And that's a very large organisation, isn't it? It relates to numerous former 14 autonomous Australian congregations of the Sisters of Mercy, and also in both the region of Australia and Papua New Guinea.
14 plus 1, 15 altogether.
15 altogether. And that involves Sisters of Mercy having considerable contact with children in different capacities.
Yes, it does.
In schools?
Yes.
In parishes?
Some, not a lot. Some.
And do you agree that it's important for the leader of such a congregation and such a large organisation to have a very clear understanding of child sexual abuse?
Yes.
How to respond to allegations of child sexual abuse?
Yes.
And also the impact of sexual abuse on children and adults in the future?
Yes.
And do you accept that your response from 1993 until 1997 was inadequate,
Yes.
and that those inadequacies further exacerbated the abuse that had been suffered by those children, now adults? Yes, thank you. I have nothing further.
David, Mr. Kernaghan.
Can I just, sorry, my name's Kernaghan and I act for two of the survivors of Neerkol. Can I just ask you some questions about the document that's on the screen in front of you at the moment, Exhibit 26. Is this a I'm sorry, just to clarify, when do you say this document was first promulgated by your order?
It's been under development. The policy behind it was adopted in, it's either the end of 2000, no, it'd have to be the beginning of 2012, somewhere at the beginning. This policy itself, as it now stands, has been under development ever since.
Thank you.
It's most recently accepted and revised in the 17th of March.
This year?
Yes.
So it's a recent document, or is this just the most recent form
Most
of the
recent form
policy?
of, yes. It has been developing ever since.
And there's some...
Not as a whole. I mean, what is written here has been developing ever since the beginning of 2012.
There are some references to attachments in the document.
Yes.
Do you know if you've caused those to be provided to the Royal Commission?
I don't know, actually.
I assume that those attachments form a standard part of this document so that anyone within the organisation who seeks to read the document will be able to apprise themselves of the contents of those attachments. Is that correct?
They're there for the sake of completion, and yes, they could be available to anybody who wanted them.
Well, if you just look at the first page and we scroll down to the bottom half of the page, at about point 7 down the page, you'll see there's reference to claims against any of the former congregations which were known about at the time of the foundation of the Institute, and it refers the reader to attachment 3. Do you see that?
Yes.
That attachment would ordinarily be available with this document to members of your institution?
Yes, it would.
And that includes all the sisters?
Yes, I can add that it took quite a long time to actually get that document together, and I hope it's now accurate.
I gather that this document, or this policy, is in addition to policies about the protection of children maintained by the Institute.
I'm sorry, I don't think I got that clearly.
I'll ask it another way. Does the Institute maintain presently a policy about the protection and welfare of young persons?
Most certainly.
And this policy works in addition to that?
Yes.
And that policy is also available to all sisters?
Do you mean the one about the one about individual ministries and things? Is that what you mean?
Well, how many are there?
There actually are a lot, and the policy states that we ask each one of them, and we do check, that they have in place appropriate policies.
That's within each separate ministry?
Yes.
And is there a czar, for want of a better term, that overlooks the compliance with those policies?
Yes.
And who is that person?
The professional standards person for the Institute, but there is also some responsibility with our Executive Office of Ministries.
Is there a policy about interagency cooperation?
We don't agency, meaning, I'm sorry?
Is there a policy, for example, about how the organisation will deal with issues that arise that are of interest to, for example, departments of community services, welfare departments, children's commissioners and ombudsmen?
That will usually be in the realm of civil law, and the policy is that we do comply with all requirements.
I see. Can I take you to page 2 of that document, at about point 7 again? You'll see that there's a heading current complaint response process dash towards healing. And there's a reference to where allegations are of a criminal nature, all complainants are strongly encouraged to inform the police. You see that?
Yes.
And then under the next heading, current complaint responses where they're directly made to ISMA P&G. Again, that sentence or that notion reappears. Complainants are strongly encouraged to inform police. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is there anywhere in the document that provides the Institute itself with guidance on what it should do with information it has that are relevant to police?
It's going to depend on whether we're dealing with children or with adults to some degree. In some states, there is just, I think with children, there's just none at all. I think when it comes to complaints from an adult, they have some say in at least most of the states about the reporting of complaints.
Yes, sister, but this is a policy about children and vulnerable adults.
That's right.
And vulnerable adults is defined how for this
Oh,
policy?
I take your point, yes.
Do you know how this policy defines vulnerable adults?
I can't remember whether we put a definition into some other document or not. There are definitions of that certainly in some of the legislation. Whether we put a definition into some other document or not, there are
Other documents as well.
Yes, yes.
The Institute, which has many policies that are published on its website, the Mercy Institute website, for example, you're familiar with that website, I take it. The Institute has a number of policies that deal with how information is to be handled. You're aware of those policies?
I can't say I've referred to them recently, but yes, because we approved them.
In your with how information is to be handled? You're aware of those policies?
Can't say.
For information from community service organisations with regard to children who are at risk. You're aware of those sorts of requests?
Yes, yes.
And that the institution has a policy of complying with the law about those requests and responding to those requests. Yes? In all of the documents that you're aware of, policy and procedural, are you aware of any requirement that the Institute itself will proactively inform investigating agencies of suspected child abuse?
It doesn't so much relate to the overall as the compliance, and each one of our institutions, our ministries that has anything to do with those certainly has that requirement put on them.
What about at the more executive level reflected by this policy?
Well, see, we don't take direct responsibility for any one of those places, so I don't think it could arise, but it certainly would be understood.
So if someone rang you today and told you information about child abuse, would you look to this policy?
Absolutely.
And if they said, look, I don't want to go to the police, I'm fearful.
If this is about abuse of a child and its criminal nature, it must go to the police.
And you would refer that?
Yes, indeed.
And where does that requirement arise in this policy?
I certainly know it's well understood. Whether it's well expressed or not, I'll certainly check out.
And just one last question on this particular document. Is it the case that, I'm sorry, can I take you to page 4 of that document, in the bottom half? See, there's a reference to funding for support and counselling, and it reflects on the helpful nature of offering some counselling as a first-level response to a complaint, and some observations about the benefits of that approach. see down at paragraph 6, point 6, it says that when attempting to reach a settlement, it is the practice of the Institute to consider an offer of pastoral support, a monetary gift or services in kind. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. What does that mean to you?
It refers to the fact that we don't try to peg exactly what type of response we ought to make. It's decided in dialogue with the person making the complaint or with whom we're settling.
And is that part of your process of prefacing a response that is pastoral over legal response?
Oh, no. If it's legal, it'll have to go through its process. But even within the bounds of something that's come to us through a legal process, often there is a mediation which might resolve the matter. Is that answering the question?
I'm asking you about what the meaning or the intention is behind the first sentence of point 6.
It just reflects the way we do things.
Is it the case that point 6 indicates the institution, when dealing with a way to settle a case, prefaces a pastoral support approach, a gift or services in kind over other approaches?
I'm sorry, I don't think I'd say that absolutely. I think I'd have to go case by case.
I see. So it's open to revision on a case-by-case basis, is your observation. Because you see, it then goes on to say where only a moderate amount is involved, there's only minimal documentation required.
Yes.
And then where things are more considerable, a deed of settlement is negotiated.
Yes.
And independent legal advice is introduced at the Institute's cost.
Yes.
And is that the case in your experience? Is that the practical case?
Yes, it is.
That the legal advice is given to, independent legal advice is given to a complainant at your cost?
Yes, it is.
So you'd agree with me that paragraph 6 seems to be about the preferred approach to settlement?
We would always prefer that there be a pastoral aspect to anything, because we don't believe that healing will take place unless there is a pastoral outreach.
It goes a little further than that, in that it says that it is, in fact, the Institute's practice to consider pastoral support, a monetary gift or services. Is that
irrespective of what else may be happening, yes.
And you say irrespective, it's not the case that that's in preference to whatever else might be happening.
As I said, I'm reluctant to make that absolute statement without working through it.
I have a question about something that you were asked by counsel assisting, and specifically in relation to the press release that was drafted by Father Lucas, tab 27. And again, if that just could be brought up on the screen. Now, I understand from your statement that this press release and what you've told Learned Senior Counsel Assisting is that this press release came about because you sought the advice of two people, and specifically in relation to the press release, Father Lucas, and you sought advice from him. Why?
In case we felt that we needed to put out a press release.
You've said at several points during your evidence that this was just something you would have if you needed it. Am I right in understanding that?
Yes.
In what circumstances did you apprehend that you would need such a document as this?
Media requests, things that we felt we might need to say. We didn't use it in the end.
I understand that. Mm-hmm. But you were the one, I take it, who spoke with Father Lucas?
I don't remember
someone spoke to Father Lucas on your behalf?
I think so. Either spoke or faxed. I'm not sure which. Did I say in my statement? I might have. I can't remember.
All right. I understand that at paragraph 25 of your statement you say that on the 7th of July 93 you sent your notes and copies of relevant media articles to Father Lucas requesting a press release, and he on that same day provided you with the draft which you've just seen on the screen. You see that at paragraph 25?
Yes, thank you.
And just to give you the context of that, the preceding paragraph shows you what was going on at the time in the days leading up to the 7th of July. You see that?
Yes.
Does that assist your memory as to whether or not you had any discussions with Father Lucas?
Unfortunately, no, it doesn't.
In any event, the notes that you sent to Father Lucas, tab 26 be brought up on the screen. Sister, are those the notes that you sent to Father Lucas?
I'm fairly sure they are.
Do you see on the last page of these notes, at the very bottom, written in handwriting, is some additional notations?
Yes.
Is that your handwriting?
The first part is mine. Second of the 7th is not mine, and 7th of the 7th is not mine.
So someone else faxed these 2 pages, so that's the reference, to
Yes.
Father Lucas in Sydney.
Yes.
It wouldn't be the case that Father Lucas, I assume, could produce a press release without you having spoken to him and making the request.
Well, faxed him anyway. I don't know that I spoke with him.
All right, but in any event, what's at tab 26 of the
Contacted
tender
him,
bundle
certainly.
is the briefing that you gave him.
Yes.
You see, the language in the press release, just returning to paragraph 27 for a moment. I'm sorry, tab 27. There's a preliminary paragraph which is in the nature of some historical observations. There seems to be some confusion in the 4th line about whether or not Neerkol was the place of opportunity for thousands or just hundreds. But in any event, in the 2nd paragraph, there's this line: "It is only natural that a legacy of parental deprivation would leave some former residents bitter and resentful." You see that?
I do.
Do you know where Father Lucas obtained that language from?
No idea at all, I'm sorry.
Did he obtain it from you?
No.
How did he know to say that? Or are you unable to explain?
Sorry, I can't explain.
When you received this, did that comment strike you as odd?
As I said, we didn't use this press release.
I'm not asking you that. You read it when you received it, did you not?
This is nearly 20 years ago. I'm sorry, I can't remember my response to that particular sentence.
You remember that you amended it a number of times, sister?
Yes, I do.
You told the Commission that in your statement.
Yes.
But you don't remember what your response was when you first received it.
That's right.
So, is it possible that that language came not from Father Lucas in Sydney, but from things you were telling him?
I don't even remember having one conversation with him by phone.
Ever?
So, no. Oh, sorry. Yes. Have I ever phoned him? I don't remember ever discussing Neerkol with him by phone.
In the next paragraph, there's a reference to extensive inquiries from people familiar with the orphanage, sisters and former pupils. Who told him that there had been extensive inquiries?
I think you'll find that it's in those notes that were faxed.
You mean
I may be
tab
wrong.
26?
Could be. I'm not not sure.
Is that the extensive inquiries that you're referring to?
The extensive inquiries he was referring to,
Is that what
perhaps,
you-
I don't know.
But you see, weren't those inquiries very small, very limited?
Yes, we didn't put this out, so therefore I don't know that I would have described them as extensive.
So what I'm asking you is, do you have any explanation for how that characterisation might arise?
No, I don't.
And you don't remember providing such information to Father Lucas?
No, I don't.
Is it possible that you did?
Got to be possible.
Yes. Because you, at the time, were the relevant person to provide this sort of information to a father or priest in Sydney, weren't you?
I was one of them, certainly.
There were other people that might have done this?
Look, I'm really sorry. I don't know who provided that information. I don't even know if anyone provided it.
Well, you were the person who was investigating the matter.
Yes?
You were the person who... Well, you were the person who was investigating the matter. That?
Not that I'm aware of.
Was there anyone else that you're aware of communicating with Sydney?
No.
Was there anyone
Oh,
else?
sorry, yes. Somebody else was sending faxes on my behalf.
On your behalf?
Yes.
Was there anyone else seeking guidance on how to respond to the media?
Not that I'm aware of.
The penultimate paragraph of that document, the media release says that controversy and media sensationalism are part of the promotional activities of the author. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that at no time had the author sought to contact the sisters, and that the sisters relied on their past record. You see that? Now, surely Father Lucas got that from you.
Look, I'm sorry, but I really do not remember.
You see, isn't the reason that you didn't seek to speak to the author of the book because you didn't care what the author of the book had to say? You wanted to defend the Sisters of Mercy.
I don't accept that allegation.
And that this press release that's on the screen now was for no other purpose than to discredit that author should the need arise.
In that case, we should have used it.
I'm sorry?
I said if that was its purpose, we should have used it. I did not use it.
You should have used it.
If our purpose was to do as you suggested, we should have used it.
Because you would have sought to discredit the author?
We didn't use it.
Yes. So that wasn't your intention in having the document. It was just to respond to controversy and media sensationalism.
If we needed it.
Well, you didn't need it. Is that what you're saying? So why have it drafted?
In case it was needed.
You're familiar with the phrase throwing dirt?
Sorry?
You're familiar with the expression throwing dirt at someone?
Yes.
This press release was preparing to throw dirt at the author, wasn't it?
We didn't use it.
I said preparing, sister. You were preparing to throw dirt at a person who had a complaint of child abuse within your institution. That's right, isn't it?
I don't accept that.
Is that because you're not comfortable accepting that the initial response to abuse allegations was to be defensive?
Can I have that again, please?
Is that because you are not comfortable accepting that your initial response to dealing with abuse claims was to be defensive?
I object to that, Your Honour. The first and the second are obvious. It's the second half of that sentence does not follow the first half. There's a real difference between a defensive approach and what my learned friend is suggesting the sister did. It's not an easy question for anyone to answer.
I can rephrase that, Your Honour.
Thanks, Mr. Kernaghan. I just draw your attention to the
perhaps that's a convenient time at that juncture as we've stopped
All
for
right.
the time being.
All right. And we'll take the lunch next, Mr. Koenig, and I just draw your attention to the
Yeah, sure.
time. You're
Perhaps
about
that's
to
a
finish on
convenient-
this topic.
Perhaps that's a convenient